Superhero Talk Show. I am your host, Brad West. Joining me, of course, is Mr. Greg Burrow from Giant Letters Comic and Fantasy here in Austin, and Miss Anastasia Anderson. And we are going to be doing our episode this week called Send in the Clones.
Send in the clones.
Clones, you ask? Well, yes. Clones. Clones are a major staple in sci-fi and especially comic books. In fact, there are clones running rampant and everything. It's a go-to storyline for anything in superhero. Marvel is one of the worst offenders for it. They have got so many clones, it's insane.
Yeah, everybody has a clone.
Everybody has a clone.
X-23, Wolverine's clone. It took 23 times to get one viable clone there.
Yep.
And then they even went beyond that because there's the Honey Badger, there's a couple of others.
Oh, Honey Badger, she's like second generation clones. I mean, everybody's got a clone. In fact, you'd be shocked to know how many people in Marvel alone are actually clones. They use this as a way of getting around some of the longevity of characters and bringing back old characters and stuff like that. But the most famous of the Marvel clones is, of course, the Spider-Man clones, the Scarlet Spider specifically. And we're going to be doing clones this week because we're in honor of the return of my favorite Scarlet Spider, Ben Reilly, is going to be the new Spider-Man again in the main comic books.
Hey.
He's taken over as Spider-Man for a while, and so I figured, this is a perfect time to go into the history of the Spider clones. Now, maybe in the future we'll come back and do the X clones and the Avenger clones, and good golly, Miss Molly, there's so many clones, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But the Spider-Man clones specifically, they're not only the most famous for good reasons, they're most famous for bad reasons. The Clone Saga, as it is known, is one of the most heavily debated eras in Spider-Man.
Well, there's not just one Clone Saga either. There's multiple Clone Sagas.
Yeah, they've come back to it several times. The 90s Clone Saga specifically, though, is a whirlwind of politics and behind-the-scenes drama and all kinds of crazy stuff. And I can't wait to tell you all of the highlights about it. It goes on, and there's lots of really great stories that came out of it, and there's some truly awful stuff that came out of it.
Yeah. Well, the first Clone Saga was actually back in the 70s.
Back in the 70s. We're going to start off today talking about the original Clone Saga. And the original Clone Saga was only a few issues long, and it spun out of Amazing Spider-Man number 121 in 1973 when Gwen Stacy died. This is important because Gwen Stacy and the Green Goblin both died, and we all know this storyline. We've seen adaptations of it in movies and stuff like that. And Marvel had gotten some really good success with this more adult kind of storytelling. And so they were like, how do we follow this up? Well, a couple years later, now Jerry Conway, you gotta remember, it's important to mention, Jerry Conway was the writer that was responsible for the night Gwen Stacy died. And we'll come back to him later too, but Jerry Conway had done that storyline. And he helped to usher in some of the better Spider-Man storylines in the 70s. And then we get to a point in time where basically Peter's moving on. He's gotten over the death of Gwen Stacy. He's starting to develop his relationship with Mary Jane. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a Gwen Stacy clone shows up. Basically what it is this character named the Jackal, in a very creepy manner, is the alternate identity of Peter and Gwen's biology professor, who had a romantic attraction to Gwen Stacy. He blamed Peter / Spider-Man for the death of Gwen Stacy, who he decided he was in love with. And so when he developed this cloning technology, he used it to both clone Gwen and Peter. And what ends up happening is you have this big showdown between Peter, the Jackal, and Peter's clone.
Well, let people read it. So how did you feel about that? How did you feel about the first Clone Saga?
I liked it. It was fun. It was interesting. Read the story. It's really good. The main thing to take note from it is by the time it was all said and done, the clone died, or maybe it hadn't. Peter wasn't quite sure.
Clone died, yeah.
Peter wasn't quite sure.
Well, I mean, they always made a lot of the clone stuff very ambiguous, because it was always like, hold it, am I the clone or am I the real one?
Well,
it's like,
yes.
I mean, that's a thing that keeps on coming up over and over and over again in not just Spider-Man clones, But
Any
Spider-Girl and,
Well, that's actually
Avengers
that's a
and
good point.
all these other ones.
That's a good point. The whole point of the clone of a clone story in a science fiction narrative, it's the exploration of self, the identity of self. I mean, what is the soul? What is
Right, who are
what
they?
is real? Who are you as a person? You know, and how real are you? And this is, in fact, a theme that continues through all of the Spider-Man clone stories.
Well, not just the Spider-Man clone stories.
Well, yeah,
I mean,
but
we're talking, you know.
yeah, but we're talking
Right,
about Spider-Man.
thematically.
I know,
Thematically,
but I'm
you're
just
right.
trying to say that it's
Exactly.
in Marvel especially, it's always been an issue when the clone thing comes up, you know they're going to touch on that.
They're going to touch on that, exactly.
Right.
Well, the thing with Peter is that it's just like him to like agonize over something.
Oh, yeah.
Just like he over agonizes whether or not he was the one responsible for Gwen's death, he over agonized over whether he was the real clone or not. And he basically came to the conclusion that since he was in love with Mary Jane now, and the clone was created before that happened, then he must be the real Peter Parker. Or at least so he thought. And that's kind of how it ended there. And it was a good storyline, and it wrapped up pretty neatly. The Jackal was dead. Gwen's clone went off to live her own life and became another person. And she, you know, knowing that Peter was in love with Mary Jane now, etc., etc. And so it was kind of fun. Now, a couple of cool things that I was going to toss in here just for like really fun.
I want to say I remember her coming back.
She does come back.
She comes back a couple times.
She comes back a couple of times. There's some really interesting stories there too with her coming back because basically, if you're familiar with who the High Evolutionary is in Marvel Comics, who's like this master geneticist who created the Animin and was in a way responsible for the creation of Jessica Drew Spider-Woman and all this stuff. He was this master geneticist his whole shtick is that he's the High Evolutionary and he's like intent on evolving humanity past its extremes to the perfect version of humanity. Of course, he does this by mixing in animal DNA and coming up with half animal hybrid people, but you know, that's neither here nor there.
Have you seen The Island of Dr. Moreau? Have you read that?
It's very much, yes. It's exactly what it is. It's basically sci-fi Dr. Moreau. Anyway, he comes back later on and starts messing with the Gwen clone because you find out that Miles Warren was his assistant, and he's actually kind of jealous about Professor Warren's, aka the Jackal, perfecting the clone technology, and he seeks to discredit him. And he learns that part of what has created Miles's clones is what I call the quantum cloning. It connects to their souls. And so the main difference in the spider clones and all the other clones in Marvel Universe is that the other clones have to be programmed. It's just like in real world cloning. If you clone the sheep is genetically has the physical characteristics of the progenitor. However, it's not going to have its memories or experiences.
Yeah.
But for some reason, Miles clones have the memories up to the point of the time that the genetic sample was taken. And so this expands further on the idea of, you know, soul and memory and thought and consciousness, etc., etc. And so that's why the Spider-Man clones in this particular part of the story is unique. And yeah, that's when the Gwen clone comes back, and that's when, remember we were talking about Carry-On?
Oh, yes.
That's when Carry-On appears. Carry-On is another Marvel character who is basically a clone of Miles Warren, who's a clone of the Jackal. And the Maximum Carnage storyline I was telling you about, Maximum Carnage, which of course the new Venom movie is kind of taking pieces from, includes Miles Warren's Carry-On character. So yeah, they do come back. So there's several other little small stories in between there that kind of branch off of the original clone story, but it's not until the 90s that we get to more crazy cloneness. However, 2 points that I really found fun. One, there was another Spider-Man clone in the comic books in a separate universe. At the time, in the 70s, I think it was, we said 1974, Greg loves Electric Company Spider-Man.
I do.
We love Electric Company Spider-Man.
Super Spidey stories.
And the Super Spidey stories.
It is cute looking.
Electric Company had a series of Spider-Man comic books published from Marvel with the Electric Company banner on it and the whole point of putting Spider-Man in the Electric Company was to get children to read because comic books are a good introduction to reading. So a partnership with Marvel produced the Super Spidey stories, which were Spider-Man stories aimed at a younger reading demographic. And it was the first time and the only time after, about a year after the original Clone Saga, that they introduced Dr. Doom's duplicating machine, which creates an evil clone of Spider-Man called Webman. And Webman is basically it says quote unquote the reverse of Spidey in every way. His costume's inverted, where he's got like the red suit with the blue and everything.
Hold up
I don't know if you can see him on the screen.
Yeah,
but
he has a version of pretty much all of the clones.
this just came out this summer, and I got it for my birthday. And so, actually, no, it came out last month. They pre-ordered it this summer, and I'm like, I must have Webman. So, I like Webman because when I was a kid, me and my friend, we both wanted to be Spider-Man. And I'm like, you know what? I'll be Spider-Man, you be Webman. And so that's how we did it.
Right, that's an easy way to be like,
But,
perfect.
So I remember this
I'm
when I was
also
a
going to
kid.
say, you might want to watch The Electric Company because you've got a very young Morgan Freeman.
Morgan Freeman, and
Yes,
He's
it's
amazing.
bizarre.
and he's narrating the Spider-Man stories. Which
He
is quite
is.
fun.
He is.
Which
So
is
he's a
quite
big
fun.
narrator now.
Yeah, right. If you want to get to the original Morgan Freeman narration, go to the Electric Company Spider-Man stories, and you will very much enjoy those. Another thing that I remember from when I was very young was, of course, the Nicholas Hammond Spider-Man television series.
Yeah.
And it's actually the only time that we've had a real clone story adapted, and this was in 1978. There was an episode called
Live action.
Live action.
Because in the
Spider-Man
cartoons,
series.
they did the clones.
They did do it in the.
In the cartoon.
They've done it recently. Yes, they have done it recently. Oh, you know, I think they did it. It wasn't a clone. They just said a guy stole his copy of his powers and was imitating him in the original '60s cartoon.
I think you're right.
But they did do Ben Reilly did make an appearance in the 1994 animated series, but we haven't gotten to the 90s yet. So
Yeah,
Nicholas
we're getting
Hammond,
there.
up at this point in 1978, Night of the Clones was a scientist. He wasn't Dr. Warren. He was Dr. Moon. Was the name of the professor. Anyway, he managed to get a sample of. Okay, he cloned this Professor Moon cloned himself, and found out that the flaw in the cloning process was that any clone became morally opposite. So when he cloned himself,
Oh my god, okay.
he cloned himself, and his clone was evil, and his evil clone locked him up and started cloning people to make evil versions of people. And Spider-Man was trying to stop him. He got a sample of Spider-Man's blood, and of course he cloned Spider-Man to make an evil Spider-Man. And this is when he discovered that Spider-Man was, of course, Peter Parker, because, you know, he clones him and like, oh, hey, surprise!
Right, look at this rando
you're
that
this
conveniently looks like
photographer
Peter
guy.
Parker.
Yeah, so anyways, and then you get the evil clone, and it was actually really quite amusing and very fun. And
Now, I'm going to throw
you can
this
find
out.
it on YouTube.
I'm going to throw this out here. They haven't released these since they did the VHS
VHSs.
releases. So I'm going to beg Disney Plus or
I know.
whoever has the
Yeah.
rights, release
Whoever
them.
has the rights, yeah, I don't know.
Also, while I'm at it, please release the 1960s cartoons other than Spider-Man. I've got the DVD set of all of the Spider-Man 60s cartoons, but I want the Captain America.
Captain America ones.
I want the Avengers. You know what?
I had several of the Spider-Man VHSs, and the VHS ones were not even the whole thing.
Yeah,
It was
the
only
movies.
certain episodes. Yeah,
It was where they combined several episodes to make movies, TV
yeah.
movies. I think they released like 2 or 3 of them.
three. Yeah, there was at least 3 of them. There was like Night of the Dragon
There was the
and
Chinese one.
the Chinese Web and stuff like that. So the Deadly Dust was the one that I remembered. I had the Deadly Dust and the Chinese Web.
Yeah.
And but you can find these on YouTube. I know, because my husband has found them for me, and he just had to leave the room while I was watching. I'm like I don't care how bad it is. I loved it so much. I love those shows.
Aw.
I love those series. I've said this before. One of my favorite things about the Nicholas Hammond series that they've never done with Spider-Man quite right is I always like the way that Stan Lee, and if you go back and you watch original interviews with him, the way he envisioned Spider-Man was, even though Spider-Man was a good person and was, you know, morally correct and everything, and a happy, cheerful person, it's the whole concept of spiders made other people uncomfortable because people were afraid of spiders, and so Spider-Man creeped people out. Even though he's a good person, just the idea of him sticking to walls, hanging from the ceilings, and the way he moved,
Right, it's uncanny valley. It's
it was,
creepy.
yeah, it was creepy. And so one of the things they did in the TV show that they've never done in any other live adaptation of Spider-Man is that Spider-Man moved insect-like. They had him kind of like look around and kind of, he had this really kind
Like
of jerky,
skittery.
skittery.
Yeah.
Electric Company, they did a little
Yeah, they did it in the Electric Company, you're right.
And that Electric Company was actually first.
Okay, yes, you're right. You are right. 73 to 78. But still, that was such an interesting element that I think that they've lost.
Yeah.
Is that they've lost the part of Spider-Man where he's supposed to make people, and it's one of the reasons
Yeah, that he's a spider.
he's a spider, and he's always having to constantly combat that uneasiness with people. And, if you read the early Spider-Man comic books, even up until, the 2000s, all the other characters, all the other superheroes, they don't know, they don't like him, not because he's bad or anything, it's just because they're uncomfortable around him. And I love that
part of it,
aspect.
but also a lot of it was because he was constantly, cracking jokes and,
Well, that's just annoying. That's
exactly. They were annoyed by him. They were very much
annoyed.
annoyed by him. So that was whenever you show up there, oh God, it's him again.
Oh God, yes.
And a lot of times they would get over that because they would say, hey, this guy's really good, and he's trying to do good here. Okay, I can put up with his shenanigans because
Right.
See, there was a missed opportunity for cutting that What If episode, you weenie.
Yeah, right. So anyway, those are the original Spider-Man clone stories, and you can find them in collections and stuff. Like I said, the Nicholas Hammond show has not been released on anything. It is on YouTube. I found it, and
you could probably still find the VHS tapes if you have a VHS, but honestly,
it wasn't one of the ones that was on the
DVD Blu-ray. Blu-ray, Nicholas Hammond, please.
Yes,
might as
good stuff.
well.
I would buy that and watch it over and over again. I can't tell you how many times I'll rewatch the Wonder Woman
Just
series.
putting it on Disney Plus,
Yeah.
so we can actually watch it.
In their
legit.
legacy collection or something.
Yeah.
All right.
I would buy a Blu-ray.
So yes, there you are.
Remastered.
remastered. I don't know.
Get those
And
sharp colors.
you know what? And the theme song was legit too.
Yeah.
Like they had
Was it?
they had a really good Spider-Man theme song. And one of the things
That's one of the things about Spider-Man, though, that I'm really trying to think, has there been a bad Spider-Man theme song? Even the 1960s one is so catchy, people
It's so
are still
catchy.
singing it.
And I'm kind of a little disappointed because in the current Marvel universe, they kind of readapted the original 60s one because now that Marvel... and I love Danny Elfman. I felt like his original Spider-Man score was a little weak. It didn't have a hook. It didn't have a really clear hook. It does have a melody to it, but nothing like his Batman or Flash
the
or
Electric
anything.
Company Spider-Man theme song was really good.
It wasn't until
Where are you
Spider-Man
coming
2.
from,
Spider-Man 2 that Danny Elfman, when he created the theme for Dr. Octopus, and he tightened the theme of Spider-Man to have them juxtaposed to where you could hear the two characters individually, that was much better. But Spider-Man 1, it was yeah. I've been playing them in the house for when I'm doing housework, so I've been listening to all of them. So.
Awesome.
All right. So anyway, on that note, that's our first installment of Send in the Clones. Tomorrow we're going to be getting into the infamous 90s Clone Saga, which is what most fans are talking about when they actually talk about the Clone Saga. And you're going to get one of two reactions. You're going to get either an eye roll, or you're going to be like me and I'm like, oh yes, because that's when I started collecting. So anyway, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow. And this has been The Red Web. Make sure you like, follow, subscribe, and check us out on bradsredweb.com to make sure you're following us daily here, and we'll see you later.
All right.
And look for our Patreon.
Oh, look for the Patreon.
Yes.
We got some fun stuff coming for you now.
Awesome.
All right. Bye,
You guys
guys.
take care.
Bye.
Bye.